The content that I'm going to be delivering is content that is articulated for youth ministry and with youth ministry in mind. Recognize not everyone here is working in youth ministry directly. We've got some people who are, but not everyone is. The principles, though, are, I think, far-reaching and important for parenting, for Christian education, for our own spiritual development. So since we're doing a video recording, I'm going to be speaking to you as if y'all are youth pastors. We're going to have pause question and answer sessions that it's just going to be us. This is going to be divided up into 5 chunks, about 20 minutes each. So this is what to expect. At the beginning, we're going to talk about what this vision for youth ministry for adulthood is and why it matters, and the context that we find ourselves in that makes this an important conversation. So the what and the why get answered in the first section. And then how you apply these principles into a youth ministry context and again others is going to come in the second half. Any questions about any of this before we get going? Great. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Let me pray for us, and then we'll get going. Father, we are your children, and you're a good dad. I pray that you would help us all come to you with the humility and hope of children to their father, to their good father. That you would prepare our minds and our hearts to receive your words, that you would calm my impulses to control or to assert my spirit over your spirit, and a readiness to listen to what you would have me say. God, your words make everything and sustain everything and remake us in the places where the violence of our inheritance and the violence of our sin have cut us down. Help us to be good listeners to your words and shape us into people who are more in the image of your Son. Lord, we love you. Help us to love you more. Amen. Well, welcome everyone to Never Stop Growing Up Youth Ministry. It is so great to be here today with all of you in the high school room at Grace Fellowship Church. We realized just a little while ago that we've been ministering together with Grace for a whole 12 years, which feels baffling to me. But this has been a place of great joy for me, a great struggle to discover the truth together, an opportunity to refine our methods. And so I'm really happy to be able to be sharing this content from Grace today. I'm here as the president of the Christian Adulthood Initiative, and our mission is inviting youth into Christian adulthood. And I believe that youth ministry, that the church's approach to loving, caring for, and training youth is one of the most important things that the church can be doing or is doing today. I see youth ministry as the American church's front line. And I don't just say that because it's the time after youth ministry that when people are likely to leave church, they do, in larger numbers than any other time. I don't just say it because it's like incredibly joyful and fun and the kind of breakthroughs that you can experience with youth as they're using their reason and their newfound emotional abilities for the first time to sort of grasp the theological insights that God gives us is incomparably happy. Like, it is so fun to see a student grasp the deep, good truths of God for the first time. That's not just why. I think that youth ministry is the American church's front line because they are the ones, the youth are the ones who have the greatest opportunity to carry forward the message of restoration and renewal, the message of the kingdom of God, that they are the ones who have our hopes pinned on them. And so I love youth ministry. I care about youth ministry. I want it to be done well. And it is true that a lot of youth ministry in the U.S. right now isn't done particularly well. That sometimes when you look at what's happening in youth ministry, you wouldn't end up being surprised that after youth ministry is one of the main times when people walk away from church. But I love it, and I care about it, and that's why I'm here today. And if you've been thinking about youth ministry for as long as I have and caring about it for as long as I have, you run into a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different opinions about youth ministry. And in particular, you will probably inevitably run into a person or a group of people. They're not always grumpy people, but they're very often grumpy people who really firmly believe that youth ministry is just a bad thing, that it's really bad to be taking youth out of sort of adult contexts and giving them ministry that is sort of cool or jazzed up or something like that, that this is contributing to the fragmentation of the church, or that the very fact of youth ministry is the thing that makes it more likely that people are going to leave the faith in the first place. And what we really need is for everyone to be gathered together in multi-generational settings and all the rest of this. And a lot of those insights are really good. Obviously, I don't agree with the conclusion that these people have reached, or else I wouldn't be here. The facts that the concern gets raised, why are we doing youth ministry in the first place? Is it good or is it bad? I think actually demands a good answer. Why are we doing this? Like, what is the point of youth ministry in the first place? What justifies us doing this? There's a couple things that I think it's really important to point out from the get-go. And the first is that the reason that youth ministry makes sense as a specific area of the church's attention is not because youth need different theology than anyone else does. It's not that they need a different set of teachings than adults do, or that children do. The gospel of Christ applies to every human. And a watered down gospel or an altered gospel is not the gospel. The reason why youth ministry exists is not because we need different theological or teaching content. That can't be it. Or else the faith united is not what we're aiming for. Secondly, it can't be because what it means to act like a Christian is a fundamentally different thing for youth than it is for anyone else. One of the things that I love most about the Christian faith, and that gives me a kind of comfort and confidence in it, is that the things that it says are fundamentally most powerful, like prayer, are things that are always available to anyone. The Christian faith isn't fundamentally something that you have to become, expert level before you can access the most powerful good things of God. It's not tiered in this way. God does care about Christians' growth, and there are beauties and wonders to behold that stretch on into everlasting life if you keep on following Him. But God gives us the most powerful practices and the most important ideas and the transformation of hearts equally, right from the get-go. So youth ministry isn't justified because they need different teaching than the adults do. And it's not justified because they need different behaviors than the adults do. So what is it? Why are we doing this at all? If they get the same gospel and if they're doing the same stuff as Christians, why do youth ministry at all? And I think that the only answer that makes sense to me, is that youth are at a specific stage of life with definable characteristics that leads them to be more likely to face a certain set of challenges that the same gospel talks about, and more likely to have a certain set of opportunities that Christian behavior makes possible than other people do. That when you reach this stage of life, the conditions of life make it more likely to have a specific set of challenges and opportunities that might inflect the way that we deliver the same gospel and call them into the same practices that every other Christian would do. So if you want to say that you're doing youth ministry in a way that's justified, you need to have a clear answer to the question, okay, so what are the unique characteristics of the stage of life that youth are in that justifies specific organized ministry? What is it that makes a youth a youth? And unfortunately, a lot of us who are in youth ministry don't have a clear or compelling answer to that question. Unfortunately, lots of youth ministry just picks up on, well, what we need to do is take theology and Christian practice and brand it with youth culture associations so that the kids can be tricked by our pretty facades into like praying and stuff. Because what we're doing is marketing. We're marketing the gospel or something like that. Totally lame. What's the point of that? I know a case could be made. Totally lame. What's the point of that? I have judged. It is wrong. Or at other times, the reason that you do youth ministry is because churches are just copying the American educational system. And there's some sort of funny expectation that since there's a grade level difference in school, there should be a church level difference too. That sounds a little funny. I don't think you'd run into anyone who said that sentence. But functionally, churches are just kind of like, yeah, let's do the school thing, but in church. But a youth ministry that had purpose and direction and clarity and joy is a youth ministry that takes what it means to be a youth as its focus point, and then through a clear and deep understanding of their challenges and their opportunities, turns and offers the holy things of God to those people in a way that matches their needs. So what does it mean to be a youth? What makes a youth as opposed to an adult or as opposed to a child? There's so many bad answers to this question. It's not school. School isn't the thing that makes a youth a youth. It's not hormones, particularly. This is one of the answers that I get most frequently from groups as I'm talking about this. Oh, it's the hormones. They're suddenly having chemicals coursing through their body, so that's what makes them weird. And that's why they're not, listening to us anymore. And that's why they're irrational. And that's why we don't want to spend time with them. It's the chemicals, which is it's really nice to have a scapegoat. Like societies really like scapegoats, individuals like scapegoats. It's really convenient to be able to blame the differences that you have with the teens in your life on the chemicals in their body instead of on yourself or on them. But the fact of the matter is, it's not actually that dramatically unusual to be at a moment in your life where the chemicals in your body do weird things. Adults go through these in all sorts of contexts too. And actually, if you look at a room of youth, honestly, there's probably a similar percentage of them that are managing their changing bodies well and poorly as in a room of fully grown adults. A room of adults has a pretty high percentage of people who are not coping well with the fact of their existence in their current state. So it's not hormones that make youth a unique set of people that have a unique set of challenges. The thing that makes most sense to me, the thing that I think is important to see is that the thing that defines youth is that youth are people who are in transition away from a childhood identity and into an adult identity. That they are people whose lives are characterized by leaving behind one way of being in the world, one identity, and entering into another one. And when you're someone who is necessarily going through an identity transition, you're vulnerable in specific ways, and you're capable and full of possibilities in other specific ways that inflect the gospel beautifully, that make it easier to hear, for example, God's promises of sanctification and glorification. Like there is more out there. There is this beautiful country that you could reach. Youth are in a place to hear that some of us, as we're older, are too jaded to hear in an honest way. Too sad, too stuck in various ways. But youth are ready. So there's parts of the gospel that because of this moment, because they're in the middle of a story of laying aside a childhood identity and entering into an adult identity, there are parts of the gospel that they will hear more resoundingly, and there's conflicts with the gospel that they're more likely to encounter. The transition from childhood to adulthood is the only universally necessary identity transition that humans go through. Everyone, if they live long enough, if God gives them grace to live long enough, is brought to a time when it is asked of them to lay aside childishness and enter into adulthood. And some of us do it well, and some of us do it poorly. There are plenty of people who enter into social adulthood while they're still the souls of children, and those people are approximately the most dangerous things in the world. Childish adults. There are also kids in any given junior high or high school youth group whose souls have been given so much grace by God to be shaped and formed into maturity that their bodies need to catch up. So we all have to meet this moment. Some do it well, some do it poorly, but it's inevitable, and it's the only one that's inevitable for everyone. All right. So what we're saying is that if youth ministry is going to be justified, it's going to be justified because of what youth are and what characterizes the stage of life that they're in. And then we've said that what characterizes the stage of life that youth are in is a transition from childhood identity to an adult identity. So what it means to be a youth is to be someone who's becoming an adult, who isn't yet, but who's becoming an adult. So if we put these things together, the assertion is that any ministry to youth that does not take adulthood as its goal too is going to be fundamentally irrelevant to him or her, and is going to miss the opportunity of deep, meaningful ministry that is available to us at this stage of life. Because youth are laying aside an identity that they've held for a long time and picking up a new one, if you don't orient your ministry toward the one that they're reaching for, your ministry is as likely as not going to be left behind with the other elements of their childhood identity that they leave behind. Does this make sense? So if we want to have long-term relevance, and if we want to have a ministry that's true to the unity of the faith, the equality of the teaching of Christ, the equality of the practices of God, if we want to have a youth ministry that's true to that, it needs to be one that's organized toward the transition into adulthood. Or else it's just a club based on a demographic set that we arbitrarily selected to pull people together for. Or else it's just a marketing campaign. So, if this is true, an implication is that youth pastors and ministers to youth need to become people who have clear understanding of adulthood, how it works, what it is, why it matters, in exactly the same way that you would expect a marriage counselor to have a pretty clear understanding of marriage. You should expect any youth minister or volunteer in youth ministry to have a really clear understanding of adulthood. Or else you should say what qualifies you to be here. Oh, you're really good at, speaking through a pile of marshmallows? Cool. Congratulations. That's an interesting skill that you picked up somewhere. What does that have to do with this? So if you're going to be serious about your call into youth ministry, you have a duty and a responsibility to become someone who understands adulthood clearly and becomes a wise guide into maturity, into adulthood. Now, that sounds exciting to me. I hope to many of you that sounds great. The thing that makes this difficult is not actually that it's radically complex. And it's not actually that it's radically onerous in some way. You don't need to be, a PhD in adulthood in order to be good at this kind of ministry. The thing that makes it complex is that as a culture, both an American culture and a church culture, we've developed a pretty significant blind spot in regards to almost everything that has to do with the transition to adulthood. There are very few conversations that happen in America or in churches about what it means to leave childhood behind and enter into adulthood. There are very little paths into a clear understanding of adulthood that exist in a shared way in our society and certainly in our churches. And the proof's in the pudding, right? People do surveys all the time asking people if they feel like adults. And every year that they've done this survey, the age keeps drifting. I think the last one that I saw, The Atlantic put one out, and there were people in their mid-30s who were saying that they weren't sure whether they were adults or not. Because our society has not made a clear path that we can all agree adds up to adulthood, and our churches aren't helping it. Now, this is kind of absurd. This is a universal experience that everyone in our society has to go through. And for some reason, we're all just forgetting to talk about it, forgetting to help each other with it. Why is that happening? And I don't think it's because there's this conspiracy of people trying to silence conversations about adulthood or something. I don't think it's because, there's a bunch of nefarious, marketers out there who are trying to lure our children into danger. It's pretty normal, actually, for any given society at any given moment in history to just kind of altogether forget to talk about really important stuff, like whether humans have equal dignity. A society might forget to talk about that for a while, with really bad implications. How did it happen? Lots of reasons. And I don't want to give a social history of how we got to the place where we just stopped talking or thinking about how you make adults out of kids. But we did. Here we are. And it has incredibly negative implications. Now, the result of this period of time where we haven't been speaking very clearly with one another about what it means to become an adult and how you make the transition from childhood to adulthood, is that some sort of half-baked shared concepts have sort of collided together in our public imagination into a haphazard myth for how adulthood happens. Now, again, this isn't a nefarious plot. When you don't talk about something, your kind of funny assumptions just turn into the laws that we all think are true. I want to point out what I think are the 4 primary components of this American adulthood myth that we sort of accidentally assembled because we're in the middle of a blind spot. Generally, in order to be treated like an adult in American society, you have a sort of tiered way to get there. You need to check off 4 boxes. If you're someone who's checked off 2 of the boxes, then you can act like an adult toward people who have only checked off 1 or who have checked off none. If you've checked off all 4 of the boxes, you can treat anyone. You can act like an adult toward anyone who's checked off fewer than all 4. And so if you haven't checked off all 4, even if you're 30-something, you might feel radically insecure about your adulthood by mistake. So what are these 4 characteristics that you need to check off in order to be counted as an adult in American society? First one is you have to turn 18. Okay? Second is that you have to earn sex. And we'll talk about this more. This looks different in Christian context than it does in American context, but it's true in both, more or less. The third is that you have to leave home. If you don't leave home, people will think of you as an unlaunched adult. And you have to gain economic stability on your own. You have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet economically. The problem with these 4 is that absolutely none of them has anything to do with adulthood at all. That they fail on so many counts. Let's just spend a little bit of time talking through each of them. Because it's become so normal to think, oh, you're no longer, you're 18. Oh, great, you're an adult. Or, oh yeah, you've earned sex. Okay, great. Any of these things just sort of are in the cultural waters. They feel normal to us. It's hard for us to see how absurd they are. So let's look at the absurdity. When I woke up on my 18th birthday, I discovered that I was a fundamentally different creature. My mind was completely qualitatively different than it was the prior night, and my heart was capable of fundamentally different emotions, and my body was just awesome. Prior to that, it was this little shriveled thing, and it was great. This magic thing happened on that night of sleep. No, this isn't true, obviously. It's never been true. How did we come up with 18 as the marker of adulthood? The answer is that 18 is when legal adulthood starts in the US. And this is inherited from old English common law that goes back into the Middle Ages in various ways. But it's kind of absurd to think that turning 18 should be the start of social adulthood, of an individual's adulthood, if we're also saying that that's when you start being able to be thrown into prison and voting for president. Like, you don't want adults to be able to be thrown into in prison or vote for president on day 1 of their adulthood. Because on day 1 of your adulthood, you're a pretty bad adult. I hope. You want to be worse. You want to get better over time. For centuries, 18 was treated more like the deadline than the starting gun. Like, by the time you get to here, by golly, you're going to be an adult. So it makes sense to throw you in jail at that point. By golly, 18, yeah. That bread's going to be cooked. We can count on it. Well enough, at least. But because we haven't been thinking about adulthood or talking about adulthood very much, and this legal thing exists, 18, adult before the law, we just okay, adult, 18. This is historically kind of absurd and interculturally kind of absurd. If you look at rites of passage all around the world, by and large, they start in the early teens. They might take a while to conclude. It depends culture by culture. They don't tend to start at 18. There might be new levels of social honor or social dignity that someone reaches pretty early on after they become an adult in their society. But historically speaking, like in biblical cultures, your adulthood started younger than it does here. People were treated like adults. Little adults, but adults a lot sooner. So turning 18 is a pretty absurd and unfortunate way to think about the beginning of adulthood. If anything, we should be treating it as the deadline. Second, earning sex. In contexts in our society that don't believe the Christian account for thriving, fruitful, beautiful sexual practice, that associates it with marriage. Earning sex is treated as sort of a badge of honor, where if you have earned sex by, successfully making someone want to have it with you and then going through with it, in your high school bathroom, you can lord it over all the others who haven't. It's this badge of honor. It's this mark of accomplishment. And I think that Christians have a fun time bemoaning this sense that high schoolers have or college students have that they need to earn sex in order to be a valuable adult in the world. But the fact of the matter is that Christian churches actually operate by and large according to the same assumption. But because Christians associate sex with marriage, the result is that in most American Christian contexts, single people get fundamentally treated with less dignity and honor than married people do. Talk to any single person, especially an older single person, in your church and ask them if they feel like they're treated with the same dignity as their married peers. I bet you anything they'll say no, if they're ready to be honest with you. If you read the Bible straight, a faithful Christian single who holds to a Christian sexual ethic is among the people who should be being most honored. In almost every area of the church, and not just the church, like Roman culture, Greek culture, all over the world, people who were faithful in their celibacy were treated with incredible honor, seen as people who were achieving a great feat of virtue, people who were worth listening to and following. But because the American church has unreflectively adopted the norms of adulthood that have swum in the American waters, we have accidentally begun to believe against the Bible's teaching and against the traditions that have been handed down to us, that single people are less grown up than married people. And that if you see a single person in your church, you should ask them pretty quickly about whether or not they're going to get married. That's the important detail to know about you. Or maybe jump to children or something like this. But no, this is not Christian. And it's not even the testimony of non-Christian cultures that have their head on straight about adulthood. Importantly, Jesus would fail this test. So, if you've got a definition of adulthood that Jesus fails, I think the problem is not with Jesus. I'll just say. Third, leaving home. The assumption that you need to leave home in order to be treated like an adult. This was meaningfully technologically impossible or unlikely not very many generations ago. It's really weird how capable we are of picking up and leaving the town that raised us, historically speaking. It requires wealth and technology that have only recently come into existence. And in fact, you don't have to go back into literature very far in order to discover that the people who were most suspect of being immature in the older stories are the people who run away from the place where they were growing up. That it's a sign of prodigality. It's a sign of immaturity to leave the community that raised you. And that the people who you're like, oh, this is a respectable kid who's growing up, are the ones who stick around and carry on the family legacy and serve the community that raised them. That was the vision of adulthood that was the norm. And it kind of makes sense, right? As soon as you think about it. Now, both of these narratives hurt certain people. There's lots of kids who should leave home in order to grow up. And there's lots of kids who should stay home in order to grow up. So both narratives are blunt and inadequate and harmful to certain groups of people. But it's so funny right now that we think that the thing that you need to do is kick them away, as if adulthood would be impossible with the people who know you best. As if adulthood could only happen in a context that has no context for you. And finally, gaining economic stability. I feel pretty comfortable saying that one of America's defining vices is greed. That our relationship to money is one of the things that singles us out for greatest moral and spiritual condemnation. And so it's not too surprising to me that we would think that the accumulation of money would be a prerequisite for maturity. Again, Jesus fails this test. Jesus lived a life characterized by poverty, by want, by lack. And he called people into the possibility of radical poverty. He blessed the poor. And the reasons that lead someone to a place of economic dependence, sometimes those have to do with immaturity and moral failings or character failings. But I mean, come on, guys. We just lived through a couple of completely random economic downturns because of bankers doing stuff, and then a global pandemic that threw everything into crazy bits about economic expectations. There's 2 generations around right now who have very little confidence that they will be able to see meaningful economic growth over the course of their lives. And it's not just because they're lazy, it actually makes sense. The things that produce wealth reliably, the things that produce wealth reliably don't exist. Anyone can get unlucky. And the fact of economic independence has no real correlation to maturity. If you look at a room of economically independent people or economically wealthy people, they are no more likely to be mature or adult-like than a room of people who have incredible economic want. Some might suggest that they're less likely to. Like the Bible might suggest that. You know. So these 4 things, turning 18, earning sex, leaving home, becoming economically independent, none of them form reliable bases for a vision of adulthood that matches Jesus or has any compelling historical purchase. They're not actually things that make children into adults. They're more like social convention dress up. Like, they're more like a funny hat that you get to wear because you're an adult now. They're these arbitrary markers that we've all agreed upon. You know, some people have to walk up across a bed of live coals to be counted as an adult. Americans have to earn sex. Just as arbitrary. These aren't fundamental to what adulthood is. So, the point here is that the waters are really clouded. Our cultural understanding of what adulthood is and how it works is messed up. But if we want to have a youth ministry that's founded in reality, that has a meaning to exist, and that has hope of delivering real gospel change into our world as the generations after us move forward into it, we need to see it clearly. And we need to offer ministry that's shaped by it to them. And we need to call them into an adulthood that's more beautiful than this one. All of you know people who are currently being injured by this American adulthood myth. All of you know single people who should be being treated with the same honor as the married people around you. All of you know kids who are younger than 18 who should be being treated with more dignity and honor than some people who are older than 18. All of you know some people who, because they're sticking around in the place that raised them, are still being condescended to by the adults who raised them. All of you know people who are economically struggling and are being treated with less honor because of it. These are painful myths with real consequences. And as we wrap up this segment, the thing I want to invite us all into is an awareness of the absurdity of the situation that we find ourselves in. An awareness of the blindness and the barrenness of our current rhetoric about adulthood. An awareness with repentance of our ignorance about what adults actually are. And a readiness upon finding a better vision of adulthood to turn toward the people who are laying aside a childhood identity and entering into adulthood to give them a better gift than maybe we were given ourselves. All right, thanks everyone. We'll go ahead and take about a 5-minute break. And if you want to chat about anything we just talked about, happy to.